A bunch of classes have been nerfed, and a lot of people have been talking about how this expansion feels very similar to the United and Stormwind expansion in terms of how quickly decks are killing you. So I wanted to not only go over through the top 5 decks that are available since the patch happened, but I also wanted to talk about what's going on with the meta a little bit more in depth. So not only am I going to be going over the top 5 decks that are available in the meta, I'm going to be taking a look at some stats in order to contextualize what exactly is going on with the Hearthstone meta. So to get this video started right, I'm going to show you guys what is currently the best deck at top 1000 legend, and it's actually just the Demon Hunter class. We'll be going into the statistics here after I go through all of these decks to kind of contextualize what exactly is going on here. But I wanted to start with the Demon Hunter class because there's been a lot of changes that have really, like, not only nerfed Quest Fell Demon Hunter, but the meta has completely changed to where different kinds of Demon Hunters are now a lot more popular. If you've noticed, aggressive decks are very much in right now, and well, what is the best way to counter an aggressive deck than to fill up your board with 3/3s with lifesteal? Like, this card is absolutely game breaking to the point where this is the reason why we are playing Spell Demon Hunter. We've also got the Lady Setheno, the Arcanist, as well as Jace as our 3 minions in order to make sure that that the souls can give us whatever minion we need in whatever situation, and the combination of Sinful Brand as well as, I believe it is yeah, here we go, Philduri War Brand is an absolute game-winning combo that is now starting to get a lot more attention now that Quest Fell Demon Hunter is not the absolute go-to. But here's the thing about Demon Hunter: a lot of these decks are still playable. You can still play Fell Demon Hunter without any problem. And this deck right here is just literally the exact same list, even though 2 of the cards have been changed. Because I'll tell you right now, Unleash Fell, going from Mana First 4 to 6 only really changes how it does against aggro matchups. It doesn't stop this card from being a very legitimate win condition. And Relic of Dimensions on 6 just makes this deck feel a lot more fair, but if you discount it with any port of the quest, then you're pretty much playing this for its original 5-cost mana. So it really doesn't feel like this card got hit all too much, and this deck is still very much possible. But if you want to go with more of a relic spin to things, then you can play this older version, I guess, of Spell Demon Hunter, to where we're not playing any kind of major burst combos. Instead, we are just going all in on Relic of Dimensions as well as Artificer Zymox. And I still think that this deck is okay, but if you want my honest opinion, I believe this is the weaker of the 3, just because I really like the Sinful Brand combo to be able to diversify your damage, rather than just, you know, having to go all in with the relics, and sometimes you have to deal with the devil being, doing what it does against aggro matchups. But like, this also does have Eldari Warblade, so you could argue that this goes more of a lifesteal route, so it kind of has more HP to work with, so it has more time to build up its game plan. That might be the key differences between how we are seeing Spell Demon Hunter in the next couple of days. But this is how I envision things happening. I imagine that this deck is going to probably be on its way out very soon, just because the other deck is a lot more tempo based. If you can take a look at the curve, it is much more small, or lower, however you want to pronounce it, however you want to say it. It's just a better deck because its curve is less of a problem, which means you're going to be able to do the combo or do your game plan more consistently. So I believe if you wanted to play Demon Hunter, this is probably where I would go, but Fell Demon Hunter is still a great deck to play in the ladder. Next up, we have a deck that I wish didn't exist, and somehow this deck is still good, because guess what? Shockspitter, even at 3 mana, is still an amazing card when all Hunter needs to do is just play a weapon on 1 or 2 mana, and then suddenly, like, you just have the most amazing amounts of damage that are possible. This deck is honestly just not what I want in a Hearthstone deck, but I'm here to report the news. I mean, and I was worried about Garrote Rogue somehow making this list, but luckily that deck is bait, but this deck is not bait, and oh god, I do not want to deal with this deck for even, I don't want to play up against this deck ever, but we're gonna see it, unfortunately. And I've been seeing a lot of people have success with this archetype as well. Hat Trick has been able to take this to rank 200 legend. I think Superior David also managed to take this deck to a very considerable legend rank. And if we take a look at Twitter here, if I can find the right things to move on to, here we go. 2K to 279. That is a pretty big thing, and that is on the very first day of the expansion, or the second day of the patch, I think. While Superior David more recently, as of yesterday, was able to take this deck to great successes and is still in the top 200 range. Something that's very interesting to point out, though, is that their lists are kind of different, which is why I wanted to point this out. They are running Tavish, both of them. Hat Trick, I don't think, is running the Hydrolodon. But I think that Hydrodon can make a decent amount of sense, but these lists are very different in terms of just like going all in with the combo, which is what you're seeing on this deck right here. So it's not necessarily that this deck is, 100% optimized. I just think there's different ways of being able to play this deck to where you can go for more of like the control aspect of the deck, where you go for the combo where you're about to kill with it, and you have still, typical Hunter aggression in early game and weapons in order to deal that damage, to where you don't just have to deal 30, you just have to deal like 20 or something along those lines. But Devouring Swarm is so freaking dumb in my opinion with Shockspitter, but if this is the direction that Hunter is going, this seems to be the only viable deck within the class, which makes me sad because I wish there was something else that Hunter players could focus on, but regardless, this deck is very much worth it. It's top 200 legend worthy, and in the top 1000 stats, when we get into that in a minute, you will notice that Hunter is performing very well. Next up, we have Aggro Mage, and this was a deck that was actually popularized by Data Innovator Donkey, and I think the deck has been going over a few changes since that previous deck, because that was a pre-expansion list. I'm sorry, a pre-patch list, where it was a little bit more in on like the, I think, just aggressive minions. But this deck has now gone in a completely different direction, to where it not only uses the arcane bolts in a very aggressive and a very massively in a tempo-oriented game plan. But now you have the Deathborn skeletons to go with this as well, so you're just generating board after board, and when you're already playing Cold Case as like a really good one-drop, it just kind of makes sense to fit in this as not only a way to deal with other aggressive decks, but you're also building up a board, and you can also clear your own board to deal damage, and there's just a lot of things that you can do with Deathborn in this deck, where like Ashwin, for example, fits perfectly in this deck instead of running the Vexillor or whatever legendary is just came out this expansion. I can't find it right here. God dang it. Well, in any case, you don't need to run that really expensive legendary. Oh wait, I don't have him. That's why I can't see him. Yeah, this card, Vectilus. Okay, whatever. Point is, the reason why we have this card in the deck is because instead of casting things twice, why don't you just give it +2 spell damage, when really the only difference is that after turn, turn 7, I think, is when the mana, oh, I'm sorry, turn 8 is when the Mana Thirst is, then it starts to cast an additional 3 damage. So the idea here is that it's always going to be casting an additional time if you just have it comboed with your Ashwin, and since you can kill off the Ashwin and play it with a 1-drop, this suddenly seems a lot better. So I think that Aggro Mage is getting a lot of support from not only this most recent expansion, but support from how the meta is progressing, to where it's not about armor decks and it's not about life. It's actually, a bunch of decks to where we can either kill from 30 or sometimes from 35. But those matchups with Renathal are still kind of not the greatest, but we actually have reach in a lot of matchups now, which is why aggressive decks are in, and unfortunately control decks seem to be out. And next up, we have probably the most aggressive combo that is available in the standard meta right now, and that is the new version of Phylactery Bomb Warlock. And the fun thing about this deck is that it's just, when you look at Bomb Warlock or any kind of Rod Warlock deck, like, the same cards are always there. Obviously, you're going to have your Rune Mithril Rod, you're going to have your Tamsin, your Nulls, your early Warlock removal, but the actual meat and potatoes of the deck is absolutely different, because now we are running legitimately running Explosive Sheep as removal options, because we can combo that with Shallow Grave, which means that the sheep deals 2 damage, and then it dies, and then it deals another 2 damage, so you have a 4 damage AoE for 4 mana, or essentially sometimes for 2 or 0 mana, depending on how your Rune Mithril Rods discount. And according to Matt Thanos, which is the guy that I saw playing this deck at a couple of days ago, he has since been doing really well with this archetype, to where he went 20-4 on the first day of the patch and went from rank 140 to 59. His list is a little bit different than the one at HS Replay, which is why I am highlighting his list right here instead of the list that's on HS Replay, because I believe that list only has one of the Shallow Graves. But Matt Thanos has been talking about how this deck feels insanely consistent. There's Devourer of Souls as well, which can work extremely well with how you set up your combos and how you set up the bind damage. So there's just so much potential of this deck to deal ungodly amounts of damage where it's just, I don't even know what the cap is anymore and how quick we can do this, because I have not play tested this deck. As you can clearly see, I don't have the legendary, but I have been seeing this a lot more on ladder, and it's gaining a lot more attention in the top legend ranks. So I would not be surprised to see more Phylactery Warlock in case those Imp Warlocks are not working as well, even though Imp Warlock is still a really good strategy at the lower ranks. But I still say that it's hard to kill a Warlock with a good broad combo, and I think that Phylactery Warlock is probably going to be the best combo deck to play in this metagame. Next up, we're going to have a deck that I actually don't have to squeeze into like the top decks, because it is one of the top decks, and I'm really happy that Death Knight finally has a quote-unquote tier 1, tier 2 really deck. I mean, it's tier 1 in all of the ranks outside of Legend, which I think is really hilarious. And again, we will get to that data here very soon in order to show you guys what exactly has been going on. But Frost Death Knight is a very legitimate deck, and is a very legitimate class, because now dealing 30 damage versus having to deal 40 is so much easier, because we have several ways of being able to double up Glacial Advances, Howling Blast. We can discover cards off School Teacher. Death Whisper, by far the best card. I really don't want to go into the strategy of this deck. I just want to talk about the card inclusions, because there'll be plenty of future videos discussing this deck right here. But the reason why we're going with Death Chiller is because it's almost like a spell damage on top of whatever thing of all the other spells that we're playing. It can also be good at being able to deal with like a sticky board. Death Chiller with Howling Blast is an effective means of removal, especially when you combo with Horn of the Winter. There's just a lot of things that this deck can do, and it's kind of funny how sometimes it plays like a tempo deck, sometimes it plays like a control deck, and sometimes it plays like a combo deck. Just to quickly explain those. Sometimes it's actually correct for you to just throw out all of your cards and try to deal 30 damage as quickly as possible. Other times, it's more important for you to focus on Lady Death Whisper copying a few amount of cards, most notably Frostworm Fury. That'll be your control matchup. Or if you're going for the Death Whisper, copying a bunch of Glacial Advances, that can be how you combo people. But here's the thing about comboing people. You're not comboing them from 30. You're usually comboing them from like 20, 25, something like that. And honestly, hitting 25 damage all in one turn with this deck is not that uncommon. And I have actually turn 5 lethaled several times with this deck. This deck was made by Tice. And let me go ahead and pull up that tweet real quick. Tice did amazingly well with this deck, to where he was able to peak at rank 12 on the first day of the patch. And now it is worth noting that this deck is not nearly as consistent as it was on the first day of the patch, but as we'll see in the statistics here in a second, it has been able to survive these past 3 days. People are still playing it, and people are still winning with it, especially the top ranked legends. So I think that Frost DK has now been solidified. We now know what the optimum build is, and unfortunately, Renathal is just not there anymore. Right now, what we want to play is 30 card freezed Frost DK. However, I will note that there is one blood DK that I have been testing that came from Kale's Luna. I cannot talk about the validity of this deck, but Kale's has been saying that this feels like the best way to be playing Frost Death Knight. I'm sorry, to be playing Blood Death Knight, since Renathal has been taken out and want to go with more of a consistent game plan. I'm just more so putting this in here in order to tell other people that other Death Knight decks are possible. I don't have a list for Unholy. I apologize for that. It's really hard for Unholy Death Knight to survive in this very early aggressive meta. And unfortunately, it's the aggro deck that loses the other aggro decks. So I would say if you want to play Blood Death Knight, go ahead and try out this deck. All the decks that I talk about, including decks that I'm not specifically looking at, will be down in the comments below. So even though this may be a top 5 video, there's like 15 deck lists down below. So make sure that you check those out, and make sure you're trying out different strategies and not just blindly following statistics. But if we're going to blindly follow statistics, it looks like Pure Paladin might be one of the best decks to play at all of the ranks. All of the ranks this deck does really well, because it does exactly what an aggressive deck wants to do. It plays for board, it deals a lot of damage, and if you happen to beat it, you can just queue again, and then suddenly you can just beat someone else in 5 minutes instead of wasting 20 minutes per game. This is just probably one of the most consistent decks to be playing right now, and I've already made a video about this exact 30 card list. I believe that Baby Bear has been playing this exact 30 card list. And if I can remember where she is, she's sitting at rank 30 legend as of yesterday. So this is the most up-to-date deck that I think that I have. Let me just make sure that everything is the same here. Everything is pretty much the same here. The Invigorating Sermon has been getting a lot of attention on Twitter as to whether or not it should be included from, like, it was from a JAlex tweet. But regardless, I don't think that there's really a lot of changes that we can make to this deck. The reason why this is in here is because you have a board more times than not, especially after you've played your Order in the Court. So there can be times where you just top deck this and it can be an additional 5 damage, which might be game winning. You never know. but I just don't really know what other card you would want to put in here because this deck is supposed to focus on all tempo, and all the other cards seem to fit in very, very well. This just seems to be the only card that doesn't necessarily fit everything this deck wants to do, but you're going to have this card come out from your Order in the Court more times than not after you have a board full of minions. So that is the reason why we're playing this in here. But I still think that this deck is extremely efficient because of how consistent Order in the Court can be. Pulling out Light Rays, suddenly you have a turn 5, turn 6, even turn 7 Blood Crusader Countess combo to give you a bunch of free legendaries, and there's just a lot of things that this deck can do to pull itself out of an unwinnable situation because of those random legendaries. So if you're looking for a deck that is going to carry you through all the ranks, I would highly recommend Pure Paladin because it's even seeing success at top 30 legend. And now we're going to look over the data over some of the best decks that we've been seeing, because as you've noticed, Shaman is sitting at the top, followed by Hunter, Mage, and Paladin, and we didn't even get to talk about any Shaman decks, and it's not necessarily saying that Shaman is bad or good or anything like that, and if you unfortunately take a look at what I'm blocking, Warrior is still shoveling up without a paddle, and Priest is somehow doing worse because the community can never play Priest decks properly. I never trust stats on Priest decks, I only trust stats on the people that play a Priest the best. Case in point, Norwis hit rank 1 legend with Boon Priest, but I'm not putting it on this list because I'm not going to encourage anybody to play Boon Priest and to hurt themselves like that. So what we are going to do, however, is to take a look at the best decks that we looked at and to look a little bit at these statistics. Because right now, here is the mulligan win rate, and I'm going to have to move my camera yet again because I actually want to focus on the turns played. I want to focus on the turns played because it really does paint a picture on how fast this meta is and how quick your decks need to be killing people, which is why control decks are just not working. So as you can see, I had Spell Demon Hunter as the best, and its mulligan win rate is absolutely insane with some of these cards, even striking a 77%. And keep in mind, this is since the patch. This has no previous game data or previous pre-patch data influencing this. This is all from new games, and Unleashed Fell is still sitting at a 77%. And we haven't looked at Relic of Dimensions, but we can take a look at that here in a second. But if you've noticed, most of these cards on the turn that they're played is actually like kind of, it doesn't look that late. But if you consider like the top cards like Unleash Fell and like Sinful Brand, these are the cards that you usually play when you're about to kill your opponent. And they on average get played on turn 7 and on turn 5. Unleash Fell is a little bit different because you can play this game or you can play this card in the early game. But now that it's been changed to where the Mana Thirst is now 6 instead of 4, you are more encouraged to play it in the later games, so you're probably going to use it as a gigantic lifesteal combo, or only as removal when you absolutely need it. But the case that I'm really trying to paint here, and this will be more apparent as we look at more statistics, is that the turn played, it really doesn't go above turn 8. And that just means that control decks are not able to survive in this environment. So if we were to take a look at the other Demon Hunter deck, Quest Spell Demon Hunter. Unfortunately, the data is not going to be the greatest on this. But if we take a look here, Sinful Brand again, turn 7. Keen Reflex, turn 6. Turn 7. Predation also on turn 7. Okay, this is not exactly a good list. The data is way too inconcise here. And this is, the funny thing about data. Sometimes you get these things and they don't necessarily, not prove your point, but it doesn't prove it enough with enough data to back it up. So unfortunately, I will have to pull up something else for that. So let me go ahead and just skip to that. And here are the stats for Questfell Demon Hunter. So sorry about that little transition there. I was kind of just trying to make that thing work without actually switching, but we're gonna go ahead and just persevere through and notice that Jace on average turn gets played on turn 9, while Guild Trader gets played on turn 8. And if you're playing Guild Trader, you're probably killing your opponent unless you're going for a gigantic Fell combo like we were stating earlier. So again, turns and games are usually going to not last past turn 9 to past turn 8. So let's go ahead and look at the other decks in order to see just how big of a problem this is in other classes. But if we take a look at some of the other top decks in Hearthstone, such as Shockspitter Hunter, you'll notice a very similar trend to where if we look at the turn played, cards are usually ending the game no later than turn 7. And again, there's a lot of situations to where there are games that are happening past turn 8, turn 9, and stuff like that. But the average is what's important, and when you're looking at the ranks of what we're looking at, through the Diamond and the Legend ranks, it really does start to paint a picture at what kind of decks are able to perform well when most of the games are ending on an average of these turns. So it's just like, you can't use this as like an overall indicative way of being able to evaluate this deck, because there are ways of it high rolling by like turn 6, there are ways of it low rolling and going towards turn 9. But just looking at the data, I think it is kind of important to note that there's not a lot of decks that are relevant right now that have cards that see play in like turn 8, turn 9 on average. So we are definitely seeing games go at a faster rate, probably even faster than some Marvel Snap games, in all honesty. And if we take a look at Aggro Mage, it's something very similar. We have, you know, the typical mulligan. We want to go for Frostweave Dungeoneer, Shivering Sorceress, and apparently keeping Deathborn is good in the mulligan, according to the data. I guess discounting it must be pretty good. But if we look at the turn played, most of the times that you're winning are either with Frozen Touch, either just destroying you from hand, after you play Blood Mage Thalnos in order to build up a spell damage combo, or if you're playing Commander Shavara and Deathborn in order to get back those last couple cards in order to win the game. I think that Aggro Mage is a little bit harder to pinpoint exactly which card is like the game-winning card, because everything kind of works in a perfect spell, or kind of works in a perfect storm together. But again, you have no card that usually has an average turn of 8 or more. I think there's only one deck on this list that even has a card that goes past 8, and it was, I think, the Demon Hunter. But regardless, we have the similar thing going on with Phylactery Warlock. Best cards, there's a lot of green here, by the way. There's the best cards to keep are always going to be your Rune Mithril Rod. But when you look at the turns played, okay, so this is one of the decks I meant to talk about. This is one of the decks that actually does have games going on past turn 8, but let's be honest, if you don't have Rune Mithril Rod, that's how those games go to turn 8. So when you do have it, games usually end by turn 6, maybe, I'm sorry, turn 7, maybe on turn 8 exactly. But going past turn 8 is not something that's usually common unless you do not have your Rune of Mithril Rod value, or if you have to play a very defensive game. But right now, all you need is like 1 or 2 board clears and you completely, you know, disorient your aggro opponent, to where I don't really think that's much of a detriment. And if we look at Frost Death Knight, it's kind of similar. Frostworm Fury is the only card that sees play past turn 8, because that's the whole point of the card. It's supposed to freeze for multiple turns. There are ways of cheating it out before then, so it's kind of funny to see this still only at 8.1. I think if this card couldn't get discounted at all, we might see it completely change. But it's sort of the similar thing. Like, Glacial Advance is the card that you're usually going to play as a lethal turn, and it sees average play on around turn 7. So you can either use that in the early game like some people do, or you just use it for the combo and kill by turn 7, turn 8. Again, a very last lethal deck. The last deck that we'll take a look at, Pure Paladin. Very similar situation. You know, you keep your 1-drops, you keep the early game, but then the average turn of this deck literally does not go past turn 7. The average turn of this deck does not even reach past turn 7. Even the Countess, a 7-mana card, on average, sees play at 6.9, and this is only the diamond. If we take a look at the legend rank, it goes down even lower. So it's like, we don't have incomplete data, so I wasn't able to look at the legend rank in every single regard. I'll just go ahead and go back and make sure that we have those updated stats. So the Frost Death Knight, turn 8 in legend. Phylactery Warlock, almost, again, barely turn 8 in legend. Aggro Mage, 7.3, it just went down. Shockspitter Hunter, we apparently don't have the data in order to actually give legend data yet. But you're starting to see the picture that I'm painting. Games are ending before turn 8 on average, and that just doesn't give leeway to the Renathal decks that are in the meta, to the HP decks, to anything that wants to play for late game strategies. There are just no ways of playing that right now, and I thought that it was really interesting to take a look of what exactly was going on there, because the meta has completely changed with the Renathal changes, as well as some of these other changes to the HP classes, as I'd like to refer to them as. But here's the thing. Thief Rogue is still really good. In fact, one other thing I do want to go over before I end this video is all of the tier 1 decks that are available at different ranks. So like right now, this is the legend rank. Look at all this diversity. You have Shockspitter Hunter, Aggro Mage, Beast Hunter. All of these codes will be down in the comments below, so don't think I'm cheaping out on that. Beast Hunter, Spell Demon Hunter, Cursed Imp Warlock, Big Spell Mage, Pure Paladin, and Frost Death Knight are all in the tier 1 portion of the meta breakdown in the legend rank at all regions. So this isn't just like one region thing, but if you take a look at top 1000, that starts to completely change, and that's because of how well Spell Demon Hunter and just Demon Hunter in general has been performing in Legend. So we have all these other decks that are still really good, but now when you look at the Legend rank, the tier 2 is so much more massive there are so many more decks. Shockspitter Hunter, Aggro Mage, Frost Death Knight, Phylactery Warlock, Imp Warlock, Pure Warlock. All decks that we've seen so far. But then suddenly, Curse Imp Warlock, Enraged Warrior, finally a good warrior deck, Evolved Shaman, Thief Rogue, still really good at top 1000 Legend as well. Almost put it on the list, but I decided to go in a different direction. Aggro Demon Hunter, Beast Hunter, Big Spell Mage, Miracle Rogue. What are all of these decks? They're all aggro, they're all combo, and they're all decks that don't want to go into the late game. So this is really the picture that's been painted now so effectively, thanks to the stats, that control, it just does not work right now. If we look at tier 3, this isn't legend, this isn't top legend, so things are going to be very merciless. But like Blessed Priest finally going down a little bit, even though Norvis at rank 1 still. Aggro Druid starting to go down because the Ramp Druid matchup isn't nearly as common. Quest Fell Demon Hunter, I feel like people are just optimizing other Demon Hunter decks, and this deck does fall short now a little bit now that the healing isn't there, but it's still a good deck. Charge Warrior, shocked to see that, but it is a combo deck. Ping Mage, like Aggro Mage, but goes a little bit longer. There's a reason why this deck is going lower in the stats. Similar to Blood Death Knight, because their strategies go longer, and it does have good turns, but it doesn't get those impressive turns anymore. And when you look at the bottom, Garrote Rogue at a 26%, man, that makes me happy. Man, that makes me happy. But you have Unholy Death Knight, Plague Priest, Prestor Druid, Quest Priest, the slow control decks, the scam deck, I guess. I don't know why people are playing Prestor Druid. And unfortunately, the deck that people want to be good, but it's just not consistent enough. So I think that I painted as well as a picture that I can in this however long minute video that I prepared for you to show that the metagame has completely shifted from Renathal, HP, and armor mattering to just straight up just tempo and killing your opponent faster, because now that extra 5 life is actually just important enough to where these aggressive decks just have enough damage in order to squeeze on by, and they don't have to worry about these big blowout turns like with what Druid used to do. Are those blowout turns still possible? Yes, they are, but they're not nearly happening as consistently. So if you guys enjoyed everything that I have prepared for you today, oh man, that was a long rant. That was a really long rant. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this video. Feel free to like this video, blah, 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 all the engagement stuff. All the deck codes are down below in the comments. Let me know what you think about this meta. Was removing Renathal the wrong move? I want to say it was, but I don't want my answer to influence your answer, so go ahead and let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. Hopefully the Hearthstone meta becomes a little bit more enjoyable. Maybe there's not as much customability, but I'm still having fun playing the game regardless. We'll see how I'm feeling in about a week from now. So thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. I'll see you for the next one.